So we're going to talk about talking with children. I just want to say a few words about why I want to talk about it. As Daphne said, we at the Haruv Institute, we imported about 10 years ago child-parent psychotherapy. And what we did is we decided to have really, really experienced clinicians learn it at first, so eventually they would be able to teach it themselves. And we had about 3 groups of very, very advanced clinicians that learned from Alicia Lieberman and Patricia Van Horn, who came to Israel to teach us CPP. We come from a country that is very psychodynamically oriented. And we were in shock. I know this might sound really, really different from the way that you all learned how to be social workers. I say that a lot of you are MSW students, but also working in child welfare, a great majority of you. And we we'd never learned actually that you want to bring trauma to the front at the beginning, right away. To talk to children. We always thought that you wait and you do play therapy with children and you kind of wait until they feel comfortable to bring things up themselves, which you may all realize it doesn't really work very well sometimes. Because if we don't talk about trauma ourselves and bring it up, a lot of the time kids think, oh, this isn't the right place to talk about it. Or that person isn't the right person to talk about it. So we all were shocked and really amazed by it. And as time went by, not everybody learned CPP. CPP is an intervention for early childhood, but there are so many things inside of CPP that you can use to treat trauma that we decided to do what Daphne says, trauma-informed programs. And we talked to a bunch of professionals in all different ways. And we talk about the different principles of what is actually treating when you have a trauma lens and you're working with people that have gone through trauma, children. Okay, one of the most important parts of it, as far as I'm concerned, is learning how to talk to children. And I want to give a little caveat before that, because all of you child welfare people, I know, we all know that if we say to a child, we know that this and that happened to you, do you want to talk about it? Chances are they're not going to say, oh, I'm so happy you brought that up. Thank you so much. I really want to have the opportunity to discuss my trauma with you from the beginning to the end. They don't do that, right? A lot of times they're also very avoidant themselves. So when we talk about talking about trauma, I want to kind of talk about how we present ourselves and what we can say to children when we're talking to them. And if this is like really obvious to you, let me know. Okay, we can close down early, or we can talk about other things. We can practice other things. But I am going to talk about what it means to talk about children. And I kind of want to talk about it both in a theoretical way, but also that we can get some examples and work on it ourselves. Okay, I also want to invite you to turn on your microphones and just burst in the middle of what I'm talking about, or write to me in the chat if you want. Okay, definitely will be looking at the chat. And Dijon, if there's any questions immediately that
yes,
that I need. Thanks a lot. Okay, but I want you to respond to me, okay? I don't want to lecture like this whole 2 hours. We'll all get very exhausted by that. So I'm going to put up, I see there's a lot of connection issues having to do with weather and so forth. And thank you for letting me know why you are not turning on your cameras. I appreciate it. I'm going to put up a slide presentation now, and I'm going to put it up and put it down so I can see you. Put it up and put it down so I can see you. That's basically what I'm going to be doing during this time. So we're going to talking about trauma. Okay, you can all see it, I'm hoping. Okay, great. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about talking as the cornerstone of therapeutic work, and why it makes it so fraught for us, why it can be so difficult for us, and what are the particulars about trauma talk with children. That's our plan today. But I also want to give a list of traumatic events so that we all know what we're talking about. I see from where you're working that you all very much know what we're talking about when we're talking about trauma. I want to give the list anyway, so we'll be all on the same page. And these mostly come from the traumatic events screening inventory, the TESI. Okay, and they give us an idea of what we're actually talking about. Okay, is there anything missing here? I think there's a bunch of stuff that's missing here. Anybody want to add anything from what we have here?
I think effects of the pandemic.
Okay, the pandemic is really interesting because I think that it could have been traumatic It was what we call a costly stress for everybody. It really, really kind of put us all way, way past our comfort zone, and especially kids and youngsters, like 12, 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, and so forth, teenagers. Okay, I don't think it was traumatic for everybody. I think it became traumatic when you lost a parent, when you were actually in lockdown with an abusive parent that wasn't going to work, or with a parent that drank much more and became drunk and more abusive because he was home. Okay, it could have, I think it was extremely traumatic for many, many children. And for the rest of them, it was very stressful. And it's definitely a thing to bring up. Any other things missing here?
We have some things in the chat like divorce, separation of parents, bullying at school, transmission of historical generational trauma, environmental violence, community violence, natural disasters, national violence and war, domestic violence, separation from siblings.
Wait a second, domestic violence is actually here. Exposure to family violence is here. Okay.
Substance use disorder and caregivers also was just added.
Okay. I could go on and talk about that a little bit. Thank you, Dijon. I could talk about it a little bit because I don't think that necessarily all of those things are necessarily trauma. I think there are parents with mental illness or parents with addictions that manage them well for long periods of time and can raise their children. And maybe are periods of time when they can't, but there are other people who can raise their children at the same time. Okay, and so it's not as much a threat to their lives as, it can be a threat to their lives, but it's not necessarily a threat to their lives and to their emotional well-being. Okay, but that's an ongoing list, and we are going to add war and terror from here in Israel, because that doesn't, it's like Americans never participated in a war somehow, that they wrote the Tessie without having that in here as well. National disasters, absolutely. Okay, so thank you. There are more things here that we can definitely add, but I wanted to put them all here so that we have kind of like a reference to go to. Okay, I'm going to start with a beautiful quote from Judith Herman, who wrote Trauma and Recovery. Whoever has not read it, it's a prerequisite for anybody that works with trauma, I think. And what she said, the ordinary response to atrocities is to banish them from consciousness. Certain violations of the social compact are too terrible to be allowed. This is the meaning of the word unspeakable. Atrocities, however, refuse to be buried. Equally as powerful as the desire to deny atrocities is the conviction that denial does not work. Remembering and saying the truth about terrible events are prerequisites for both the restoration of the social order and for the healing of individual victims. Okay, here, when I hear that she talks about it going from everybody would like to forget about trauma, to push it down, to not have it be something that we're involved with, both us as individuals, but also as a society. But on the other hand, we can't do that. It comes, it appears all the time. Okay, so I wanted to ask you, like, are Israelis the only ones that have a real struggle about talking with kids about trauma? What do you all think? Like, is it, I don't really know. So that a lot of people I talk to say, well, talking to kids about the terrible things that they've gone through is a really hard thing to do. What do you all think? Is it hard? Is it worthwhile? Should you avoid it?
Some kids are just not ready to talk about their trauma. That's what, in my experience in child welfare.
Okay, that's absolutely true. There are many kids that don't want to. There are a lot of forces. What Melanie says is really true, because there are a lot of forces for us not to talk. There are a lot of things that there are forces. Parents don't want to talk about it. Professionals don't want to, and kids themselves don't want to. Okay, and why don't we want to? Why don't the kids want to actually?
It brings up that emotional pain again that they're trying to get over.
Okay, absolutely. Okay, the feeling is that why should I experience that again? Why should I feel that kind of pain? Right? It's kind of an essential question, isn't it? I always think when as a therapist, I always think with my clients, I say, that the good news about coming to therapy is that you might end up feeling better. And the bad news is that you're going to have to feel your feelings, right? Which is really bad news for all of us. Okay, Toya says shame. That's one of the reasons why kids don't want to talk, or a lot of us don't want to talk. Okay, and a lot of kids are told not to talk. That's true. Okay. Lynn says that it hinders the growth of emotional intelligence, thus making it hard to speak about it. Okay. Trauma itself hinders the growth of emotional intelligence. It's hard to find words. Okay. So we're going to talk about all those things a little bit more, but, and afraid to upset parents. Absolutely. Okay. We're going to talk about all of those things together, but you're actually agreeing. Is there somebody that does not agree that it's not very hard? That's hard to talk about trauma. That's hard for people in general.
Yeah.
Okay, you agree or you don't agree?
Completely agree. It's hard to talk about trauma.
Okay, so here comes some assumptions, okay? Both parents and professionals tend to avoid talking to children about traumatic events. And we'll talk about why in a second. Okay, when we do not talk, it leaves children exposed to the explanations of others and also to the developmental fears, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. Okay, fears that come as they're being children. Alicia Lieberman always says children are keen observers. They're terrible interpreters. And they see tons of stuff that's going on. But they don't, because of their developmental agendas, they don't always have the right explanation for what's going on. Trauma does help children to heal. I have a friend named Smadar, who is a developmental psychologist. She goes, talking is trauma, is medicine for the brain. It helps bring things that are not spoken about, that the cortex, to be able to give it some kind of meaning about what's going on. That's kind of why it's important to talk, okay? Explanations really, and discussing things, they help avoid or help lessen anxiety and uncertainty. We help about narratives about what happens to them. Okay, I always say, I have this very academic way of saying that children who have trauma, especially complex trauma, feel usually stupid, crazy, and bad. Okay, stupid because it's very hard for them to learn a lot of the time. Crazy because of the hormonal overload of stress that they're always feeling and their difficulties in regulation. And bad because most children will say, and I don't know if this is your experience in foster care, those of you who are working in foster care and child welfare in general, most children, if asked for an explanation of what happened, they will say that a good part of it was their fault, that they got into the situation that they did. The other thing that I want to say, it's very important for children to be able to have some adult in their lives where they can help them explain the situation. And because of the work that you're all doing, I see what your jobs are. It's important that we see ourselves as professionals that can do that kind of work. So that's kind of why it's important to talk. And I do want to talk a little bit about the types of memory that we have. Okay, we have what's called, we know that experiences are registered verbally and non-verbally, right? It's known pretty much today that very small infants experience trauma, sometimes much worse because of their immaturity of their entire hormonal and growth systems. Okay, that they can't give, they're just inundated by I'm trying to think of the word, of stimuli that is really, really harmful to them. So the implicit memory works outside of the consciousness. It's in the pre-verbal part. And it turns out that children often can remember parts of the traumatic system or experience or act out the trauma. We know that infants can really express trauma in all kinds of nonverbal ways. Okay, and then we have what's called explicit memory, which is the conscious memory. It's the concrete details and the subjective part. Okay, what we actually remember. So actually, we have trauma inside of ourselves. Bessel van der Kolk says that trauma, the body keeps the score, right? And that it really is inside of our body from the beginning. So we know that that's the kind of thing that we want to be able to help with. Okay, I'm going to put this down for a second. And you already started answering a little bit. Let's talk about parents for a second. Why parents have such a hard time talking to their kids about trauma? Just let's make a list because there's all kinds of reasons.
They might feel guilty that they, didn't stop whatever it was from happening to their children.
Absolutely, or that they caused what happened to their children, or they didn't stop. You're absolutely right. Guilt is a huge thing, right? Parents in the 21st century, whoever's a parent here, we are run by guilt. But it's true that knowing that your child went through a traumatic experience and that we couldn't do anything to stop it, or God forbid we were the ones that caused it, is really a very good reason not to talk about it at all. Okay, somebody wrote here that they feel like they might be protecting them by not talking about them and not making them experience their feelings again. Okay, and one of the things that we know is that everybody, most people, not everybody, but most people have a very benevolent reason for not talking to children. They don't want to cause them more pain. And that is the idea. Professionals don't want to don't want to cause more pain. We don't want them to feel what they felt before. Okay, other reasons?
Like, I know when my husband passed away, it was really hard for me to talk about my child, about his daddy, because it made me emotionally unstable, and I didn't want him to see me being like that because I thought it would make him feel worse.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that, and thank you for the example, because what I want to say is that you experience trauma. Parents often experience trauma along with their children. Okay, and that makes it very hard for them to be able to talk to their children about something that they are experiencing so intensely, especially because trauma really causes us to be dysregulated. And there's nothing like a death of a very close family member to really make us very dysregulated. And that makes it really hard to talk to kids. Okay, somebody wrote denial here. Okay, I think denial is a very, very big reason as well. Okay, what did you mean by denial? Do you want to give an example?
I think just not being able to accept whatever the trauma is, whether if it's their responsibility or not.
Okay.
Just kind of the overarching not able to accept.
Okay. Often, okay, parents, I think partly because of their guilt, probably because maybe a lack of knowledge, will also say he didn't know, he didn't experience it. We only fought when he was asleep, right? He never saw me drunk or me drugged, right? Or he didn't understand. And in general, there's also a very pervasive view that very small children don't understand what happened, that they're not affected by it, and that they can really overcome traumatic events very, very naturally and quickly. That's a very, very strong view, as the younger the child is, actually. So that's also really true. Okay, so what's my list say? My list is similar to your list. Let's see what we have on it here. Okay, what I do want to add is that the child might be a trauma trigger for the parent. Okay, we often see that with children that, wait a second, actually, I showed it to myself, but I did not share the screen. So I'm going to do that over and over again because I always forget. There we go. Okay. These are just some of the reasons. I think that we can find many, many reasons why parents have such a hard time talking to their kids. And I want to go on now to talk about why we have such a hard time. Assuming that we do have a hard time. Okay. Why would professionals have a hard time talking to kids?
Not feeling competent, maybe, to handle that conversation.
Totally. That's a really, really strong reason. I'm not well enough trained. I'm not competent enough. I don't know if I'll hurt the kid by talking to him about it, the child. That's a really big reason. The other reasons?
I'm always afraid of like the after, I hate to say the aftermath, but you know, if I bring up when I was interviewing kids, like, and I get a big disclosure and they talk about their feelings and we get it all out, I'm not there to help afterwards. And I'm not there to continue the conversation or to be there for them afterwards. And I was always afraid of, if they give me this disclosure, or if I help them now, you know, if they go out and talk to mom or dad or grandpa and say something else, will mom or dad or grandpa discipline them or ruin this or make it worse or penalize them for what they're saying, or, you know, use words that are going to hurt their feelings. And I was always worried that when something that they told me was there was going to be residual effects after I was done or after I left, because
a real fallout. Yeah. Disclosure is a really big thing, right? Disclosure, it's its own issue. Okay, what do we do when children disclose to us? What does it mean? I think that I want to take that, Brandy, although to also talk about sometimes clinicians feel that if they are only with a short time with the kid during some, let's say, some crisis work or something like that, they don't want to talk to them because they're just there for a short period of time. And they think that once they get to to other place where they can actually talk more, that's the more appropriate place for them to go. Kids can really roll from place to place that way. I see it in Israel all the time, that they'll be in a social agency. The social agency will say, okay, the intake worker isn't going to talk about the trauma with the kids or with the parents because they're going to get another worker. And then the other worker says, but we're going to refer them to the child parent center and they'll talk to them. And then they get there and they'll say, okay, but the kid's going to go to residential care and somebody will talk to him there. And it's not appropriate because we're not with them for enough time. And that can continue on and on. But disclosure, I want to go back, and disclosure is a real issue. What's going to happen after the kid talks to me, especially when he goes back to his family or to the people that he's disclosed about? Okay, that's a real fear. Okay, Martha says it's hard to formulate language for speaking with very young children. That's totally true. That's what we learn in CPP, right? Is we really have to practice how we talk to small kids. We don't know how to do that. I don't think we all learn how to talk to kids in general. Teenagers is a little bit easier because their language is a little bit more like ours, but it's not something that we particularly learn in professional school. Now, we don't really practice on the kind of language that we want to use when we talk to kids. Okay, this is their own issues. Also true, sometimes it's very hard for us. Sometimes kids can be a real trauma trigger for ourselves as well. Okay, that often happens. So there are also very good reasons. And let's see what my reasons are. We'll put them up here. Okay, those are the ones I added. I want to add the one about not knowing how to explain. How do we talk about a father who murdered the mother? How do we talk about really cruel things that children have seen, often by his attachment figures? How can we do that? Okay, that's really, really difficult for us all. Okay, so it's hard for them as well. For staff, it's also very hard to talk sometimes. Okay, and staff can manage that in all kinds of ways. Okay, what does meeting trauma do to us? We want to be able to talk about this in our staff. How alarmed are we? Do we minimize what happened? Okay, do we sometimes try to get a different worker? Maybe he'll talk to him because he'll be able to see him longer than I will. And often what we have to do when we're working is be able to feel the feelings, the traumatic feelings of the child, but also to be able to organize our own thoughts. And that's really hard. That's a really hard thing to do, or simultaneously. Often we're very frightened of using direct words. Okay. I always say, and it's easier to say than it is to do. But often people say, when you talk about trauma, you're not causing trauma. The trauma caused the trauma. And you all are probably thinking, yeah, that's just fine, but we are arousing the feelings from the trauma, right? They're feeling something again, and that's not very pleasant for them as well. Okay, so sometimes I think it's really hard for us to be able to do that, to talk about things that are so difficult and worry about how the kid's going to react. Okay, and I do want to talk a second about children themselves. Kids have also good reasons not to talk, right? And I think that some of them you talked about already. Okay, wait a second, that is not the one. What keeps children from talking about trauma? Let's return on some of the reasons. Fear of disclosure. Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, sometimes I've noticed a lot in my child welfare work, kids don't talk about the bad stuff that happens to them because they've been shut down either overtly or subconsciously by the adults in their lives who react badly when they start to talk about those things. So they learn not to.
Okay, so it often could be a learned behavior. That's not something that you talk about. You do not talk about the traumas in your lives. Absolutely. Other reasons?
I think culturally with sometimes within the Black community, it's what happens in this house stays in this house, and don't talk about that to other people that don't live in this house.
I think so. I think that there are a lot of cultures like that, and you're saying the Black community is like that. Is that's not something that's talked about. Okay, and children learn, right, what they are allowed to talk about, what they're not allowed to talk about. Okay, thank you. Casey wrote self-preservation. Summer wrote trust, connection, told the story too many times. Okay, I have some extra things that I added here. Okay, as a loyalty or the habit of keeping secrets, which somebody talked about just now. Shame and guilt always. Okay, and learned behavior, which you're talking about. One does not talk about those kinds of events. Okay, so you're all saying, so kind of the cards are stacked against us, aren't they, in terms of talking about trauma. Nobody's really loves it. It's not our favorite thing. And often we spend a lot of time avoiding it. And that's something that's really important for us to know, because children often stay very much alone with what they're feeling. Okay, now big question is actually who does talk to children if we have all those people that don't. Okay, and I have here questions that kids sometimes ask themselves. They don't ask it like consciously, but these are kind of the questions that they live with a lot of the times. Okay, is it something that I did? Do I deserve this? Am I going to be left again? Okay, who can I depend on? Teenagers are very, very involved in what do they think about, what do I think of my parents, and will I be like them? Will I be violent like my mother? Will I be addicted like my father? I know mental illness, kids are very, very worried about, often adolescents especially, about will I turn out to be like them as well? And these are questions that they're actually carrying around with them a lot, that they need help with, because otherwise they stay really alone. Okay, so John Bowlby, I don't know who knows this article, another seminal article, kind of along with Judith Herman's book about trauma and recovery, wrote an article called On Knowing What You're Not Supposed to Feel, not knowing what you're not supposed to know and feeling what you're not supposed to feel, which in itself is a beautiful title, isn't it? It's I really like that. And he talks about what happens to children who experience things and their environment says you didn't experience it. It didn't happen. Okay, with sexual abuse, that can often happen. She's imagining things. She started it. She's just trying to get everybody in trouble. She's a troublemaker. She always has been. She's exaggerating. We hear often. And also what happens to kids who are told that they are not supposed to react in terms of feeling what they're feeling over traumatic events. And he talks a little bit about what the fate of those children are. And the fate is not good. And that doesn't shock any of you, I'm sure. But the idea of growing up not knowing, not being able to trust what you know or what happened to you, and to know that it really did happen, or not knowing which of your parents or who actually tells the truth and who I can depend on, is a real recipe for attachment difficulties throughout life afterwards. And also a real sense of not being able to trust myself and my feelings and what happens to me. Okay, it's a great article, and whoever has not read it, I highly suggest it. Okay, so what do you need to do in order to talk to trauma after all these things that we've been talking about, how difficult it is? And I want to tell you that I talk about it and I say, we should all talk about trauma. And I was just thinking about what I do in my own professional life in terms of talking, and that here I am preaching to everybody about how important it is, and how I also have times when I really find myself avoiding. I say, I did an intake. Did I ask about sexual abuse? Did I ask about domestic violence? Did I ask about trauma in general? And why not? And it's just a kind of a fact. I think that we all kind of have to work against our instincts about not to talk in order to be able to do it. That's my own personal feeling about it. So what you need actually is you need to believe that it's important, I think. Okay, hold on a second. We have to find the right words, which, as Martha pointed out, is not always very easy. Okay, we have to practice with our colleagues sometimes what we want to say. We have to be prepared to talk about our mistakes. We have to be prepared to talk to children about the fact that maybe we didn't talk about this right, or maybe we were insensitive, or maybe we talked too much, or maybe we did all kinds of things. And I kind of feel that in terms of the children that you all are working with, who really don't have models of adults who took responsibility for hurting them, you know, so you're the child and you should not have been harmed the way that you were. Their attachment figures didn't say that. Being a helper, a social worker or a helper that says, I did something that wasn't right for you, is incredibly therapeutic and incredibly important. Because you're saying, I'm an adult who's taking responsibility for having hurt you in some way. And that wasn't okay. I think it's a really big difference of being able to talk. I personally have a friend named Smadar. I told you about Smadar, who talks about talking is the medicine of the brain. When I don't know how to talk to a small child, because I work a lot in CPP in Israel, about what happened, I say, I have to talk to Smadar. I say, Smadar, what do I say? How do we talk about a soldier being killed? Like, how do we talk about a medical procedure? How do we talk about somebody dying for a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 1-year-old, or whatever? Okay, and that's the way that I get through it. And that's a really important thing that we have to be able to do. And the question is when. I'm going to be kind of like why, when, how we should talk. Okay, and these are some of the times that I can think of when it's important to make sure that we're talking about it. And one of them is when we meet a child at the beginning. Okay, any kind of intake or so forth. Okay, during our initial contact, we want to be able to talk to the child, to the family. I think when a child comes to child welfare, you usually have some kind of reports. You have some kind of knowledge about what happened. That's a time to talk about you knowing what happened to the child. Okay, when a child's symptoms seem to be really related to the trauma, and you can really see that. When you're treating a child and something else traumatic happens inside of the family. Okay, when the child brings up trauma himself and wants to talk about it. And often as a theme in group work. Like my kind of dream in Israel is to be able to have a group of kids in residential care, whatever, have a psychosocial group, a psychoeducational group about trauma and what it does to you and how it affects you and so forth. I live in a residential treatment center because my husband directs it. And one day I was walking by 2 kids that were on their way to lunch, and one of them was talking, a 10-year-old or so was talking to the other kid, and he said, trauma isn't something that you do. It's something that others do to you. That's what he said. And I thought, wow, that could really benefit from a group talking about what is trauma and what happens to kids when they do experience trauma. And I do want to say to you that in parentheses, have any of you seen the workbook of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network on complex trauma for teenagers? Does anybody know that? If you go into the what's the National Child Traumatic, right? As I said, right? NCTSN. Okay, they have a workbook on complex trauma that they say it's from ages 12 up, and they say it was written for kids because kids have to know what it is as well. And it's a psychosocial book that talks, actually, it's fantastic. It talks about what regular trauma is, what just having a bad day is, what complex trauma is, what you feel and what you think and what your behavior is like and what your relationships are like when you go through complex trauma. Okay, I don't remember what it's called. I'm gonna look it up in my break. I'm going to have it here somewhere. You know what, I'm gonna see if I can get it. I'm scared to mess with my laptop too much while I've got you all here. So, I'll look at it when I'll look in the break, and I will look it for you. The other thing that's really, really great, by the way, is there's also a film that the National Child Traumatic Stress Network wrote that's called Never Give Up. And if you write in YouTube, Never Give Up, NCTSN, okay, you'll see it's a group of young people in their early 20s, late teens, that talk about what complex trauma is for them. And they say, for instance, complex trauma is when you feel that you have nobody on your side. Complex trauma is when you feel that there's no safe place for you. And they talk about how they reacted to it and what happened to them. And the most dramatic thing, as far as I'm concerned, in that film is that they all said that they didn't know that they had experienced trauma. They thought they were just screwed up kids. They were just there's something wrong with them from the beginning. It took what the power of knowing that they had gone through something traumatic was for them. It's really good. And that you can find easily on YouTube. I will write that also chat when we get a break a little bit, okay? So let me find where we are. Okay, these are the times we want to talk. Now I want to talk a little bit about when we want to talk, what we want to talk about kids. And you all know this, right? This is an Americanism. What's wrong with you, opposed to what happened to you. Okay, the idea actually behind it is that we want to be able to link symptoms to events, right? We want to be able to say to a 4-year-old, for instance, of course you don't want to say goodbye to daddy when you go to kindergarten in the morning because mommy's so sick and you might be worried that he can get sick too. Okay, we want to talk about symptoms as having to do with the events that are happening. Okay, that makes it that kids are not just screwed up, bad, and so forth, rather that they have very good reasons for behaving the way they behave. Okay, so that I know is a real big American phrase, and we love it in Israel, and we didn't know it, and now we know it. And I'm going to move right over to the triangle of CPP. How many of you? Let's turn this off for a second. I can't ask you. I want to ask you whoever knows the triangle to turn off your cameras, but don't, because a lot of people have their cameras off anyway. So maybe you just want to raise your hands, either who knows the triangle in CPP, who's learned it, Martha? Anybody else? Erica, Deborah. Okay. Triangle is something really amazing in a lot of ways. I think about the triangle as something that one uses in life. And what it says, okay, is that any basic talk, and our CP people here in the group, help me, yes, okay? If you have anything to add, I know that there are CP people here. I see you, Deborah. Okay, you're welcome to add whatever you would like to add to help me out here, okay? But we use the triangle in CPP at the beginning of treatment of a child, actually. Okay, after we've worked with the parent and thought up to the parent about what happened to the child and why the reasons are, and we want to introduce treatment to the child. And in CPP, as in many trauma treatments, we want to begin with saying we know that the trauma occurred. We know something happened. We don't wait, okay, until the 3rd or 4th visit to say that to a child. We say it from the beginning. Okay, often do you know why? Did your mommy tell you why you're here? Or did your daddy or did your foster mom tell you why you're here? Okay, and we want to say we know that this and that happened to you. Okay, we know, for instance, I'm talking in terms of little kids. I know that not all of you work with very small kids, but something very, very, very sad happened because your daddy got sick. Okay, and he had to be in the hospital a lot, and he really tried to get better, and he took all his medicine, and the doctors really wanted to help him. But in the end, his body just couldn't hold the sickness anymore, and he couldn't move anymore, and he couldn't breathe anymore, and he died. An example. Oh, we know that something really scary happened to you, that you saw your daddy fighting with mommy, okay, and what happened there. The second thing we want to say is that because of what happened, we know that the child had very intense feelings or symptoms, okay, as a result of that. Okay, so we might want to say, since your daddy died, was it daddy that died? Yes. I'm trying to remember my story that I told you before. Okay, you don't want to say goodbye to mommy, and you cry every morning when mommy takes you to kindergarten, and you want to sleep just in her bed, and sometimes you get really mad at mommy and you hit her. Okay, as an example of things that we want to say. And the third thing that we want to say, okay, so there we've actually tied the events to the symptoms or to the feelings, right? And the third thing you want to say is we can offer some kind of help or hope, that we're going to play here, or you're going to come and talk to me, or you and your mommy will come and talk to me, and we'll play together, and we'll talk about what happened so that you can feel better. Okay, those are 3 elements that are so incredibly important. Deborah, did I do that okay? Do you want to do anything you want to add? Okay. I have my eye on you. So I have a friend. I just want to tell you, I have a friend who works with me named Shira, and Shira is a educational counselor. And she said, I thought her son was her husband was overseas for work a little bit too long for her son, who was 4, and her son was becoming impossible and fighting with her all the time. And she came to me one day and she said, "Decide to talk all that stuff that you guys do, social workers talk." So I sat with my son and I said, and she goes, "I started with the symptoms." I said, "You know, Rami, you've been having so many fights with me lately, and we are always fighting, and you're angry at me, and you don't want to sleep." And I think, because then I talked about what happened, and I think it might have to do with the fact that Daddy's been away for so long, and you must really miss him, and you're wondering when he's coming back. And then she said to me, my friend Shira, I didn't forget the hope. And she said, and I also want to say that Daddy's coming home really soon. And in the meantime, I'm here. And I'm going to take care of you. And if we fight, we fight. But it's going to be okay. Daddy's going to come home soon. Okay? So that's what she said to her son. And then she went off to do whatever he was doing. And I said to her, "Wait a second, did he react at all?" She said, "He looked at me like this." And he said, "Again." And she said, "What again?" She goes, "What you said about Daddy." That was his reaction. He was like really kind of like, okay, it really, really spoke to him. So I was very happy that I helped her. And actually, it's a really great tool for our relationships in general to say, we know you're having a hard time. And because of that, often my husband, you're impossible to live with, whatever, but because things are happening to you, but I'm here or whatever, and I can help you. And that's what we want to be able to do with kids, okay? We want to be able to use those 3 things in the very least to be able to make them feel understood and that we know that the trauma occurred. Okay, I want to put this up a second. I have some comments in the chat. Oh, thank you, Dizon, that you put up the link. Okay, I want to say one more thing, and then we'll maybe talk a little bit more about that. I want to talk a little bit about what we learned in CPP about children's universal developmental anxieties, which actually Freud talked about. Okay, I'm going to ask again, am I repeating something that you know already or not? Somebody give me some kind of indication about the universal anxieties, if they've heard about it, if they haven't heard about it, if I should go on, if I should stop, if I should skip it.
I think go on. I've heard you say it before, but it's helpful to have that review.
Okay. So what Freud said is that, hold on, get you back here. Freud and his daughter actually also said that as children grow up, the first 5 or 6 years of their lives, that Freud said that children develop within 6 years and they're fully developed human beings. And we know that's not quite right today, but that's what he thought then. And he said that as children develop and grow up, they get universally appropriate developmental anxieties because they're getting mature enough to fear things. And the first thing he talked about is the fear of losing the object, the person, the attachment figure. And he claimed that happened in the first year of life. Can anybody, what we see in the first year of life, we can say is that maybe the fear of losing a loved one? What's the manifestation of it with little kids around 7 months, 6 months, 7 months?
Are you talking about object permanence?
I'm talking about stranger anxiety that leads, actually. Oh. You're very close. Good job. That on the way to object permanency. Okay, but at the beginning, really, children go through a lot of stranger anxiety. We know that, right? Around 7 months, 8 months, 9 months, we see that these are the times when my mothers say, I can't even make myself a cup of coffee in the next room without him going ballistic all the time. He wants to be with every second. Okay, and that's a real fear that small children have that begins to actually get a little bit less intense as they begin to achieve object permanency. Okay, which is what you're saying. The second thing that she talked about, Freud talked about in the second year of life, is that children begin to fear losing the love of their parents. Okay, and he tied that to toilet training. He actually said that children agree to be toilet trained because they really want their parents to love them, and for some very mystical reason and mysterious reason, parents seem to be really thrilled when their kids stop using diapers. So we know also that the age of kids begin to have different agenda from their parents, right? So what are some famous 2-year-old words that we know? What are 2-year-olds famous for? in their terrible dreams? No. By myself? Don't want it, right? Begin to have a different agenda from us.
Mine.
Okay. Mine. Mine. Okay. I always think about, how mothers and fathers try to be really, really organized, and they organize the clothes and they organize the bag for nursery school, and everything is ready. And then they go in to dress their kid in the morning while they're looking at their watch for work because they have it timed to the minute. And the kid says, "By myself, I want to get dressed by myself," right? And then parents want to die because that's not exactly the right time. So parents begin to get angry, okay, at their kids because their agenda is not the same. And that also causes children to worry that they'll lose their parents' love. The third thing they talked about was the fear of bodily harm as children begin to become more and more active and can hurt themselves sometimes. And I just want to bestow upon you all the great advice of the best present to buy a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old for his birthday. Anybody? It's cheap, it's effective. Band-Aids. Okay, kids accessorize with them around those ages, right? Because it expresses kind of their fear is that if they don't have a Band-Aid and all the blood will fall out. It's clear and something terrible will happen to them. And the last thing, their last fear is their fear of being bad, which happens as Freud talks about the development of the superego, the conscious, toward the Oedipal period, and so forth. Now, all of these anxieties, why are we talking about them? There's something to talk about. Okay, all of these anxieties actually go up, and if life is going okay, they get resolved. But they come up again when bad things happen. So if you're thinking, let's go back to COVID. Okay, let's think about a kid whose father is in the hospital. Okay, what developmental fears are coming up again? Speak to me. In COVID, I think that we had a great deal of these fears going on among us all.
Yeah.
Okay, Catherine, do you want to say something?
Fear of death.
Fear of death, fearing losing somebody dear to us, right? Fear of bodily harm for sure. Okay, the idea, did I wear a mask? Did I not? Am I causing other people to get sick? Am I not, if I'm bad or not? I think I want to move over to the child who's been sexually abused. Think about all of these fears and how much they actually play a very, very strong role in what's happening to the kids. And this is important because they can be spoken about. Okay, you can talk about these. And I do want to tell you about one. I'll give you one example. I'm looking at the clock, not yet to break. Okay, I'll give you an example in my work, in my private practice. I had a mother the husband died of leukemia, and she had 2 or 3 actually daughters that I saw together just because there was no other way to really see them. And they were the most dysregulated family I've ever seen before. And my room looked like hell by the time that they left it. And if nobody was injured, it was really good. It was really hard for me to treat them. It was really, really hard. And at the end of one session, the mother came up to me, she said, "Paula, I'm thinking that I should get the COVID vaccine." And I said, "Great." And she says, "But I'm really worried if I get sick from it, who will take care of my kids?" And I said, yeah, I get it. But I'm also kind of thinking if you got COVID, who would take care of your kids? And she said, you're right. And so she came back the next day and the kids were uncharacteristically drawing and busy with their things. And she says to all of her kids, "Tell Paula what I did." And they look up and they said, "Mom got the COVID vaccine." And I said, "Wow, great. How was it?" And she said, "I was half dead from it." Okay, that's the way she said it. At that moment, the room froze. Okay, now I've learned that in therapy, you always want to start, Alicia always says, start with simplicity. So I said, "But you weren't really half dead, were you?" And she stuck by what she said. She says, "I was half dead." And the kids were really quite in a panic. And I thought, okay, how am I going to help these kids now? And what I did do, and what kind of fear are we talking about here? What developmental fear has come up again? Dad died, mom's half dead. Okay, we have a fear here that maybe mom could die too. So that's what I basically said. I said, you know, girls, adults say that as an expression, meaning that they really didn't feel well. Okay, but I think that's really hard for you guys to hear that, because you think to yourself, if daddy could die, mommy could also die. And then one of them picked up her head. She goes, it's true. She goes, what'll happen? What'll happen if she doesn't feel well? What'll happen if she gets sick? Who will take care of us? What happens if she dies? Okay, so actually what I could talk about is the developmental fear that comes up as a result that trauma has made it come up again. Okay, and I said to the mother, but mommy actually was getting the shots so that she'll be healthy. And I tried one more time desperately, and you weren't really half dead, were you, mom? And she laughed and she said, no, I just didn't feel well. Okay, but that's kind of an example of how we see kids react, how the developmental fears that kind of take care, and how we have to talk about them a lot when we talk to kids. Talking to kids about things not being their fault. You guys, all of you in foster care and in child welfare, tell me what your experience is. Do most of your kids feel that they did something because of that they're taken out of home, or they're the troubled children or whatever? Is that your experience? That they feel that it's their fault, or not so much?
They do feel that way. We even have parents that will tell them it's their fault because maybe that child disclosed.
Exactly. Okay. So
I have a niece who my sister's husband kind of pretty much abandoned the family. And the niece recently said, I think daddy left because I took the Cheetos without asking.
Okay. And how old is she?
She is 8. So she's old enough that you would think she would know, but she's blaming herself.
And when did her daddy leave her? What age?
Oh, it's been probably 7-8 months ago. They were divorced and he was doing visitation and then just completely stopped.
That stopped. Okay. When visitation stops, kids are positive that at the very least that they're not lovable enough. Okay, to be able to stay, to have their parents stay in the picture. Okay, but that's exactly the example of what Alicia Lieberman says about kids being keen observers and terrible interpreters. Okay, she interpreted very poorly, your niece, okay, her father's abandonment, actually. Okay, and that's a part where we can talk about the fact that it has nothing to do with what happened to her, what she did. Okay, that daddies are supposed to stay and take care of their children. Okay, and that's not her fault. And I think it's a fantastic example. Okay, and a very sad one about what children think all the time. They think Beth says also we see a lot of placement moves for kids in foster care because they think if they're bad enough, they have to move enough, we'll put them back with their biological parents. Okay, yeah, there are a lot of reasons why kids feel that they're pretty bad, huh? And that you're talking about being bad enough as a strategy, but I think that also these foster kids also begin to really believe how bad they actually are. Okay, and that's something that we want to talk about all the time. Now, if you say to her, that's not because of the Cheetos, okay? And your daddy is an adult and he's a grown man and he has a daughter that he's supposed to take care of her and see her. And he has his other reasons that don't have to do with who you are. I'm not sure how convinced he'll be, but I think it's really important to say. Okay, anyway.
Which we did say, and she's not convinced. She's totally not convinced. She's repeated it a few times. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. There's something about her. Okay. And kids will grow up that way. But I think the most important part is to at least not, as so many parents say, it is because of you. Somebody said here that it is because of you that all kinds of terrible things happen. Okay. What for very small children, when their parents die, one of the things that we want to say to them, it has nothing to do with something that you did. Because kids in their omnipotence really believe also that that they could have prevented their parents' death or maybe caused it. Okay, so those are the 4 development fears, and I really just think about how you want to incorporate them in your therapeutic work when you talk to kids. Okay, what I was thinking about now is I have a case here, but this is not a good enough case for you all because you're working with hardcore problems. I'm going to kind of go ahead And I'm going to give you this case instead, because this is a little girl. And what I was thinking we'd do, what I suggest that we do is that we'll read this. I'm going to give you a link that you can write a triangle for this little girl about what you want to say to her. We'll look at them together. And we'll sit out for a break. Okay, if I can manage the Padlet, that's what we're going to do. Okay, I'm in a little bit of, I'm going to read the case first. Okay, we have a little girl named Odelia. Okay, she's the only daughter of Orly, who is 27 years old. And Orly was diagnosed with bipolar disorder at age 18, never cooperated with medical professionals, claiming that they'll make me even crazier. She sometimes has psychotic episodes and then she can become violent. Odelia is being raised by Orly's mother, by her grandmother. She's a quiet and well-behaved child, now in kindergarten, and she goes to a therapeutic after-school program in the afternoon. Grandmother told the program social worker that Orly has moved far away from them, but sometimes stops by to visit without prior notice, which takes Odelia out of her routine and sometimes frightens her. She doesn't know how to explain to Odelia what's happening with her mother. She just told her mom's not quite okay. A few days ago, the mother arrived suddenly in a psychotic attack. When the grandmother told her to leave, Orly threw a chair at her. Grandmother called the police, who took Orly screaming from the house. Odelia saw it all. The same night, Odelia couldn't sleep. The grandmother asked the social worker to explain to the child in her presence what's happening with her mother. Okay? So I want to do now, I'm going to put, hold on a second, if I can, a link in the I thought I was going to do that. Here we go. Okay. So here is a link. What I want to suggest to you to do Everybody see it? Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna put the triangle up in a second, okay? What I want you to do is write on it. If you open it up, you'll see that you have a little plus next to it, and then you can actually write something on it. And I want you to think about what kind of triangle you would want to say to this child. And the grandmother said to you, you can, he said to you, I want you to tell her, but I'll be there to listen as well. Okay, I'm going to put up, first of all, the triangle, and then I'm going to put up, you're seeing the, actually what's it called, all right, let's. I'm not going to put up the case again, I'm going to put the triangle again. Okay, I'm going to assume that you understand the case more or less. Are you all seeing it? Okay, I'm going to give you 2 minutes now to look at the triangle and to start writing, and then I'm going to put it on your screen with the Padlet. Are you all able to open it? Is it working? Yeah, okay. Yeah, great, okay. I'm going to turn it off now. I'm going to put up the Padlet instead. Okay. Why are we not seeing what you're writing? We are. Great. Okay, what we see here, talk to Odelia. Odelia, okay, talk directly to Odelia if you can. You guys are great. You can all see the, you can see what's in, right? What's appearing on the screen? Yeah, okay, good. Thanks. So. We have 7 more people working on it. We'll wait 1 or 2 more minutes. Just take a look, everybody. Okay, this is fantastic. We can talk about this for another hour and a half approximately, but what I want to suggest that we do instead, we take just a 5-minute break, because 2 hours is a little bit too long for us to continue. Like really 5 minutes. Okay, stand up, stretch, go to the bathroom, come back, and then we'll wait to these a little bit and continue. Okay, so I'm gonna take a look for a second. Y'all, it's great to hear other people and the way that they talk. I'm going to say a few things, and I'm going to ask you to say ask you what you think also. Okay. So if you remember the triangle, we're talking about something happened to you, you reacted or had symptoms, and some kind of help that we're offering, right? And let's start with what happened to you. Okay, what happened to you last night? We have the following. We have somebody says that your grandma told me that your mom came for a visit and she was acting strange. We have from grandma, well, from what grandma said, it sounds like you had a scary time together. Okay, your grandma tells me that mother came over last night and the police had to come over. I know only a very small portion of what occurred today. Tell me from your perspective what happened and how it made you feel. By the way, I do want to say something about that. And I want to say something about asking 4-year-olds or 5-year-olds or 15-year-olds, by the way, or 13-year-olds, what do you feel about things? For me, it doesn't work very well. Ask children, what did you feel? Especially little ones, maybe bigger ones better. Okay. I had a teacher who once said, if you want to know what a teenager feels, ask them what they think, and then they'll tell you what they feel. But there is something about asking about feelings, okay, that is hard. And this is a 4-year-old girl. That might be a little bit hard for her. Okay. And Odelia, would you like to talk about what happened today? I know it can be scary to see your mother when she's upset. I'm talking about the things that what happened. Okay. You saw your mom be taken from your home. I was told something happened at home and you saw something that was scary. It's okay to be frightened and unsure about what happened. I heard what happened with your mom, and I know that can be scary. Okay? You saw mom do some scary things and had to be taken away by people. We already know your mom only comes by sometimes, and last time she came, it was very strange. Your grandmother told me your mommy was not feeling her best right now. Okay? I heard a little about what happened. I understand that when you saw when your mom came and threw a chair at grandma, was taken away by police, and it made you feel very scared. Okay, and then we have explanations, which are lovely. Mommy's brain isn't correctly working like our brains. She has bad behaviors because of that. The doctors are trying to help her. Also, I heard something happen recently. And some people say, let's ask her what she saw. Why do we have to say what we're saying, right? Can we talk a little bit about what you saw? Or do you want to tell me? Okay, so we're looking at different ways that say that all of them are extremely valid about what to talk about. I would want to add, kind of as far as the way that I think about it, is that I would want to say a little bit more in detail what I heard that you saw, because it becomes unspeakable afterwards. Like, I think I would want to say using a feeling chart is great for little ones. That's true. Okay, that's a great idea in terms of talking about feelings. But one of the things that I was thinking is that it would be important to say that your grandma told me that your mommy came and she was acting strange or whatever, and she got really angry and she threw a chair. Okay, and grandma had to call the police and they came and they took mommy away. Okay, why do I think it's important to say all of those things? Personally, I think it's important because if we just say it's strange or something upset you, we don't have the words. For me, it's like we don't really necessarily have the acknowledgement that something specifically scary happened. Okay, so
Miss David, may I just interject there real
absolutely
quick? Just for those of us in child welfare, we cannot, when we're talking to these children, list details until they tell them to us first, or it's considered leading.
Absolutely. No, I want to say what I'm talking about here, and thank you very much for saying that. We are talking about trauma that we know happened. Okay, the question about disclosure, the question about understanding, the question, we do not speculate about what we know, ever. And you're totally right about that. But what I want to say is that there are tons of traumas that happen that we do know what happened, and it's still hard for us to talk about them. Okay, in child welfare as well. Okay, and these are things that we can talk about because we know that they happened. The grandma told the social worker. Okay, it's not something that we're waiting for disclosure in this case for the little girl to say. It's something that we know. Okay, we only say that we know what we know. We do not conjecture what we know. Okay, and thank you for making that clear. And I do want to say that we're talking here about a trauma that is known. At the very end, I want to talk about what happens when we don't know what the trauma is. How do we do that? How do we talk about that? It's a very good question, but this is not that case. Okay, and there are plenty of things that happen also that we know. We know that parents died. We know that parents overdosed. We know that a father was in jail and the kid knows that we know and everybody knows it. Those are also things that we talk about. Okay, and that's why I'm saying that I think here in this case, I would want to say, personally, I would want to say, you saw your mommy get really angry and throw a chair. Okay, which is really dangerous. She did a dangerous thing. And then grandma called the police to come get her because she can't allow dangerous things to happen at home. Okay, that was kind of like, does anybody else want to say something about that? Thank you, Genevieve, for responding to that. Anyone else? Should we go on to the symptoms? Okay, I'm so glad that you all wrote. We have so much to actually work on here. So what are we talking about the symptoms? Okay, we say that, you know, it's scary. Do you want to tell me how you feel about what happened? Okay, that must have been pretty scary for you. Okay, that must have brought a lot of feelings like being scared or worried. I know it can be scary to see your mother when she is upset. Okay, that must have been very scary. You're scared because you don't know what's going on with your mother. It's okay to be frightened and unsure about what happened. Okay, I'm sure this brings up a lot of feelings for you. I know the police came in, that's very scary. Okay, we're all talking about feelings here, right? That she must feel. Is there anything else that happened to this little girl that we know about in terms of symptoms? You remember from the case?
Well, it said when her mom shows up, just kind of out of the blue, sometimes it scares her that
that's right.
Is just coming by. So there's that lack of attachment between herself and her mom.
Right. Okay. Laura asks, thank you. Laura asks if she doesn't remember without the case in front of you. Fair enough. One of the things that says that after that happened, she couldn't sleep at night. Okay, which is also a symptom and something we can talk about. We can say, you must have been really scared, and grandma tells me you couldn't even sleep at night. Okay, after that happened. Okay, it's a possibility that we could add that. And then we have the part, uncertainty and anxiety when her mom comes around. Absolutely. That it really gets, you're not sure what's happening every time your mommy comes. Okay, you can't be sure what's going to happen. That's also really a really great thing to say to a kid. It's an important thing to be able to say to a kid. Okay, and then we have the hope. Okay, and the kind of feeling about so here I'm starting from the bottom because I never get to the bottom. What I want to do is help you to find a way to make sense of it all. You are safe, and we're going to keep talking so you can feel better. Okay, I'm worried about you. I want to check in and see if there's something you want to talk about. We can talk about what happened and make a plan for when you have these feelings and help you feel safe. Your grandmother and I are here for you to help you understand these feelings when you come up. Okay, the people that mom are going to help her and get her well so that you'll be able to see her. It's hope from a different side, right? Not just about how to help her, but that hopefully that this will help her mommy as well. Okay, what else do we have here? I'd like for us to talk about it today. I'd like to talk to you about what you thought and how you're feeling about it. Can you talk about how you're feeling? Can we talk about how you're feeling? Okay, a lot of people said that. Okay, so that is your offer of hope. Okay, what you're saying is, I'm here and I'm really willing to talk about this with you and grandma. Your grandma's here. Okay, we can talk about this. Okay, and see if we can help you feel better and feel safe when these things happen. Okay, I go back and I want to say about how would you like to tell us about what you're feeling. I'm not a big fan for the 4-year-olds to say, can you tell me how you're feeling? The feelings chart or the whatever, the ones with it is a fantastic idea. Okay, let's see where you are now, or what happened when that happened, what happened to you. And I also really believe, but you may have noticed that I'm a big talker. It may be somewhat obvious from this lecture. And I do want to say that I say things for kids all the time with the understanding that I might not be exact, by the way. I will say that must have been really scary. Okay, or you must really, really not know when she's coming and be really worried all the time about when your mommy's coming or not. Okay, the reason I'm doing that with a 4-year-old, and I think also older kids also, is that because trauma really harms emotional regulation so much, a lot of our kids don't have a lexicon of feelings. You all, that makes sense to you, right? I think that all of you who are working with kids with complex trauma, their lexicon of being able to discuss their feelings and talk about them with nuance is really not huge. Okay, they've been living on the hard side of feelings, of feeling terror, rage, loss, helplessness, okay? And sometimes it's hard for them to be able to talk about other things as well. Okay, so that is our idea about what we can do in terms of introducing triangles. I want to talk a little bit about different things that we do when we talk. Okay, this could be kind of like, let's see if I can find it. Other things we want to talk about are building parts of a narrative. Okay, giving meaning to what's happening to a child. Okay, how the events happened, what happened. Okay, and sometimes in order to make it clear more what happened. Okay, and here you talk about that your mommy has some kind of illness. We'll talk about that a little bit later. As an illness or something happening to her brain, okay, that she doesn't always think right, or she feels big feelings, she doesn't always know how to behave or whatever. One of the things that we want to really try to do when we can, okay, sometimes we can't, is talk about the intent of parents to do right by their kids, even if they're having a very hard time doing it. And we'll talk about that a little bit more now. We want to relate to the universal anxieties when we can. Okay, losing the parent being angry at them, getting hurt, feeling bad. Okay, one of the biggest things that I'm always thinking about is that just acknowledging that the event was traumatic is so important for kids. That was so scary. In Israel, social workers tend to say something really, really not simple happened. It's a bad translation. Or something really complicated, something really difficult happened to you. And I don't feel that that's the language of trauma. I don't think it gives enough, it doesn't hit the experience well enough. Okay, with trauma, it's something really scary happened to you, something terrible happened to you, something really frightening, something really sad happened to you. Okay, I think sometimes have to use bigger words, okay, to be able to convey that we realize what a terrible thing's happened to a child. I think that's really important. Okay, we want to give meaning to breaks in relationships when there are breaks in relationships, why mommy can't be with you, why your daddy left, okay, where they are now and why they can't be with you, taking care of you, and always to emphasize the well-being of the child. We need to protect you. So those are kind of parts of things that we want to use, okay, when we are building narratives with children. And I want to talk about some dilemmas, okay, because there's so many dilemmas about how we do this, obviously, okay. First of all, I want to say that children respond with varying degrees of regulation when you talk to them. Very few children will say, thank you for talking about this with me. I want to tell you about my experience and how I was feeling, what happened. They don't, especially kids who really had really, really hard lives. They don't do that. Okay. Sometimes when we talk to them, we see various degrees of response to them. There are those that can take part in the conversation and actually talk about their experience. When we say, we heard that something happened. I had a kid, it was before I learned CPP, and the mother didn't want me, that 5-year-old kid whose brother was very sick, the mother, for some reason, didn't want me to talk about that. But when they came together, I said to her, your mommy tells me it's been really hard at home recently. And she was like lying on her mom, and she said, and they sighed like an 80-year-old, and she goes, that is so true. That's what she said to me. And then she went and drew all kinds of things. She drew actually, she drew hearts. And I said, you know how to draw hearts? Wow, that's really hard. And she said to me, I'm the only one in my classroom that knows how to draw hearts. I drew a heart for all the kids in class. And by the time I drew hearts for everybody, I was too tired to draw a heart for myself. That's what she said. Okay, so that was her way of talking about the difficult things that happened to her. I think that was lovely. Okay, there are kids that might listen passively, but not really add anything themselves. They'll listen to you. There are some that look like they're not looking. I imagine that you have many, many teenagers with their phones, okay, who are busy looking at their phones when you're talking. Okay, one of the things that I always kind of cracks me up is that you can think about like the most elegant thing to say to a kid about what's happening. And I thought about it and I'd say it. And I thought, oh, wow, this is so important. And then the kid will be drawing. I'll say, Mommy, look what I drew. Totally ignoring what I said. Okay. And then the mother usually says, listen to what Paula's saying to you. You have to listen to what she's saying. And I want to believe that many times they are listening to what I have to say. I actually had this family with a COVID shot when there was absolute chaos in the room, and I said, is anybody actually listening to what I say? And the 9-year-old picked up her head and she said, we always listen to what you say. Sometimes it looks like we're not listening to what you say, but we're really listening to what you say. And I said, well, thank you for letting me know. And I think that's really true. I think the kids often look very avoidant. They go to the window, they don't look at us. That's their way to regulate themselves. Okay, they can get aroused, restless, move around, interrupt. And then there are the kids that will say, stop it. They don't want to talk, that will leave the room and get really angry. None of those actually mean that you did the wrong thing. But what it does mean is that we want to be very sensitive to the regulation of the child and how much we can talk with him before he can't listen anymore. I mean, really not listen anymore, not just listen to his phone, but really can't tolerate. And we want to sometimes say, can I say something else? Can I add something? I want to say one more thing, but I see that you're looking at your phone, or maybe it's enough for you. You know, you kind of want to take a break. What do you think? Can I say something? Can I not say something? I know it's hard to talk about these things and so forth. Okay. So our dilemma is how far we want to go. And a lot of you spoke about that at the very beginning, about that we don't know if we're hurting kids by talking and what's going to happen and how they're going to react to us. And if we're actually doing harm or not doing harm. That's one dilemma. The next dilemma is what I call parents who have difficulty with hard lives, they have difficulty in functioning. And those are mostly, I would say, mental illness and addiction are like two really, really good examples of them. That we have special things that we want to say about that. And one of them, we have to about what a developmentally appropriate explanation is to the child, right? About addiction, about alcoholism, about mental illness, and so forth. And I'm not going to get into that because it's really hard. We often think about it. You all tried to cope with that with this case with Odelia and think about something with mommy's brain that doesn't work well. Okay. And sometimes we'll say mommy has an illness in her feelings. Okay. And they make her really angry or whatever. Okay. We'll try to think. And older kids, we can talk much more about addiction because they've also heard about it and they experienced it. I'm talking about kids about alcoholism, for instance, where they're really tiny is really, really difficult. It's hard. One of the things that are really important there is that we want to talk about the fact that the parents have a problem that's really hard to overcome. Okay, and some of them are trying, some of them are not trying. Okay, and we want to be able to talk there about the disparity about how much the parent would want to take care of his child and his inability to do that. And we want to do that if it's true. Okay, there are many cases where we can say your mom and dad would really want to raise you by themselves, but they have big problems and they have problems with drugs and they're trying to get over the drugs so they can take care of you and they can't do it. They can't be parents. Or for smaller kids, we say they can't get you up in the morning, they can't dress you and they can't get you off to school and they can't make meals for you because they have the sickness that they have to take care of themselves. Okay, and we want to often point out who can take care of the child and protect the child. Who's going to do that work for them while they're gone. Okay. Parents who do evil things. Evil is one of the, I think, most difficult things to do. Okay. Actually, a colleagues of mine just wrote an incredible paper on they're both CPP clinicians and trainers, and they wrote a paper on the moral development of children who are exposed to domestic violence and the role of the therapist. Daphne, if you remind me to send it to you, then I can, then you can send it off to people. I love it. And what they talked about is that we often have to be very unequivocal. We're also, I'll say something else. It's really hard for us to talk about parents that have harmed the child, that have killed the mother, right? That have done all kinds of really horrific things to the family. Okay, but we also know that it's hard for us to talk about something because we know that sometimes the kid really longs for that. Right, the kid may very much long for that parent and want to be with that parent. What the article says is that we are people, that children who grow up with that kind of violence often do not have a keen moral sense of what's right and what's wrong, because their identification with the violent people, okay, with the fathers or the mothers in their lives and so forth. And then it's our job to say unequivocally that what they did was totally a wrong thing to do, a bad thing to do, and that's not the way you're allowed to behave. while simultaneously, obviously respecting the child's need or desire for his parent if he does want them. Okay, but your mommy or daddy did a bad thing. They did something that is totally not allowed. It's not okay. And he has to be in jail now because people have to be protected. Nobody is allowed to kill somebody. Nobody is allowed to rape somebody. Okay, and that's one of the things I think it's hard for us because we know how much kids really sometimes very much adore their parents. And I have an example here. 1 second. I have too many screens up one. Oh, I don't have it here? Huh. Okay, I gave an example of a kid who's in a shelter with his mother after the father almost murdered the mother in front of him. It was very violent for a long time. And the child had a supervised discussion with his father. And he came to his therapy session and said that his father said that that mommy's also a little bit guilty because she's really, really irritating sometimes, for instance. Okay, and what would the therapist say to a child who comes and says, mommy's also guilty because she can be really, really irritating sometimes? Okay, that's a time when we feel that we have to actually make a very strong stance about that. Anybody can be irritating. That does never, never, never allows people to be violent because of that. Okay, and the third thing, I'm kind of hurrying along because I want for questions and comments. And the third thing that we do, and this is our question, Genevieve, this is for you, disclosure. What happens when we don't know what happened? Okay, a lot of times we know what happened, but what happens when we don't know what happened? How do we talk with kids about things that they haven't happened? And I have an example for you. These are all made up cases, okay? Natalie is the youngest of 3 children and the only girl. Her family has come to the attention of child protection more than once because of extreme poverty and various problems with the children. There seems to be violence between the parents and some suspicion that Natalie is sexually abused by her brothers. However, Natalie, as well as her parents, deny any problems. And although she was interviewed a number of times at a child advocate, what's called a child protection center or child advocate center, she shared no information. Her brothers have recently left home and gone into residential care. In therapy, she's keen to know about the therapist's sex life, asks if she's married, what they do in bed. She draws pictures of naked children. And once, when the therapist patted on Natalie's shoulder, she said, "Get your hands off me, you pervert." What kind of triangle can we make for a kid like that? How can we talk about that? Anybody? And those are a huge majority of cases often. Deborah, wow, that was quick. You got the article and a link to it as well. Thank you. What do you do when you see a kid who's totally symptomatic, often with sexual behavior or sexualized behavior? This is happening to, I'm sure, many of you. You don't know what happened, and you're not going to say you must have been sexually abused because you don't do that, right? But how do you relate to that? And think in terms of a triangle. What can you talk about?
You can talk about her own behaviors and say, I notice you're drawing the pictures and talking about these things, and just maybe ask her why she's drawing, why she's doing those things, why that behavior is coming.
Right. Okay. I totally agree with you. I think that what we're going to do is we want to start with the symptom. We'll say we don't know what the event is. Okay, but we do know that children that have symptoms like that, maybe they're trying to say something to us, right? And I wouldn't necessarily ask her why she's drawing them because she's not going to tell you, basically. Okay. But I wouldn't say other things. Anybody else would say anything. As soon as we say, okay, we see you're drawing pictures of naked kids and you called me a pervert because I touched you on your shoulder. What are we going to do about that? What else can we say? Genevieve started us off. Anybody else?
You may have said, but how old is this child?
I think I did say, but I don't remember myself. 10.
Okay.
I think it said 3.
What?
I think it said 3 years old.
No, she's 10. This one's 10.
Oh, she's 10. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, she was old enough to call her therapist a pervert.
Maybe talk with her about her boundaries.
Okay, what would you say? Let's say that I'm not to leave. What would you say to me?
Well, I noticed, like, I talked to her about how I touched her, asked her about what a proper boundary and what appropriate touches are. What is she like? If she don't want me to touch her, ask her about that. Like, okay, explain. Can you tell me about your boundaries, appropriate, not appropriate, and just go from there.
Okay, I want to talk about what would you say about her calling you a pervert when you touched her on the shoulder? Then we might want to. What does a pervert mean to her? Great question. What do you mean a pervert? What does that mean? Okay, and another thing that I would also say is I would probably want to apologize for touching her on the shoulder. That I didn't ask for permission. Okay, and that she's saying that's not okay. Okay, but we can say other things too. I want to kind of take it a little further and say, I kind of feel like I'm trying to think of it myself, because this is what you do, right? You have a kid like that, and you start thinking to yourself, Amanda thinks to herself, and Genevieve thinks to herself, and we all think to ourselves, okay, how are we going to talk about this? And it's hard. It's hard to kind of find the words. She's 10. We want to find the right words for a 10-year-old. On the other hand, we know that she's actually talking here about a sexualization of her life in some way, right? In general. Okay, so we want to say, okay, I say you're drawing naked kids and you don't like me touching you, so I was a pervert. And I kind of think that kids, I don't know what to say. Help me out here. Okay, maybe you're telling me about things that happen in your life, and maybe you're not. Okay, or maybe I'm not feeling that's very successful. I'm kind of stuck here. If anybody wants to help me.
Like, is this something that's happened to someone you know?
Maybe it's something that happened to someone you know. Okay. Okay, we have a couple of possibilities here, right? Okay, and then we want to add, by the way, we have a triangle here, so we can add, you can talk to me about stuff like that. Okay? And she'll say, I'm going to talk to you about it. Israeli kids go like this, and they shrug their shoulders, and they do all kinds of stuff like that. That's our particular culture. They go like this. I don't want to talk. Get like that. So, or they say, you think so? I'm going to talk to you, or whatever she might say. Okay, but we do want to say, yeah, but if you want to, I want to tell you that I can hear that. Okay, so many times you're going to have symptomatic behavior that is telling you something, and you can tell the kids, I see that your behavior is symptomatic and you're telling me something about that, because kids that draw pictures of naked adults and call people perverts and want to know about what's happening in their bed, they're really interested in all kinds of sexual stuff. Okay, and it may be that what Catherine says, maybe that's something that you know, maybe it's something that you're thinking about or is happening. Okay, we want to go as far as we can go in that. But we can use the triangle to also present ourselves as people that are able to hear if we want to. Okay, I want to end here. I don't remember what I want to end with. I do remember that I do want to end. I want to be able to have a little bit of time for us to talk. Okay, I want to talk one more time about the fear about making mistakes. Okay, and I want to say there's a good chance we're going to make mistakes. Okay, traumatized children are dysregulated. They don't appreciate you. They don't appreciate therapeutic interventions a lot of times. Younger kids are better at it. Younger kids are more responsive, but also if they've learned at an early age to not trust anybody, they also have a hard time. Okay, we want to be able to follow their cues about their level of regulation. Okay, and if we can apologize for something and recognize that they are scared or hurt or angry at us, it gives them a model of an adult. So I do want to say to you, don't be scared. I always think to myself as a therapist, I was thinking that if I waited until the perfectly designed intervention was in my mind to say, I would never open my mouth, basically. Okay, because we're always trying, right? You all are always trying to talk to kids or to talk to their parents and see what works and see what doesn't work, and kind of offering conjectures and asking questions and thinking about what happens. But we don't always have it perfectly set out in our minds. And if we're willing to try and then maybe say, okay, that didn't work well to the kid, to ourselves, and so forth, it helps us be more proactive in talking to kids in the long run. And that's what I kind of want to encourage. I always say to myself that if I think about all the things that I talk about in therapy and how many times, like how many percentage of the time, a really well, a really good intervention comes out of my mouth, I would say maybe, and being generous with myself, maybe 20% of the time. And I think that maybe around 60% of the time or 70% of the time, I'm not hurting anybody by what I'm saying. It's okay. And then there are times when I say things that are mistakes to say, okay, afterwards. Okay, the idea is not that you don't talk. It is that you try. And you say, I want to be here for you, child, who went through such difficult things. And if it doesn't work, or if they are not responsive, to say, okay, this isn't working. I'm not saying the right thing. I'm not doing the right thing. How can I help otherwise? Okay, so I'm going to end here. And we can model, repair it when they're erected. I think that's the most important part, actually. I think the part is that we're not expected to be perfect adults that know how to perfectly talk to children where their attachment figures did not. Okay, but we are kind of people that are going to be by their side and say, we're here by your side to get through things that you've gotten through together. Okay. Questions, comments, cases. We have 8 minutes. Yes.
Do you have any tips on, I often have cases where the parents just disappear. They stop coming to visits, they stop calling, and they just drop off the face of the planet. And I really struggle with children who ask me why. I don't know what to tell them because it's only
because you don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really hard. These are foster kids or foster care?
Yes.
And then their biological parents or their caregivers, actually their original ones, disappear.
Yes.
Yeah. And you don't necessarily know why.
We usually don't, because they're usually trying to avoid us. So we have parents that actively hide and go several states away.
Okay. Okay. So what can you say to a kid about that? That's a really great question. Sometimes I think if you don't know, I would say, I don't know. I don't know. But I do know that when a mom and a dad, okay, leave and aren't in contact with their kids, that's so hard and it's so hurtful. And it makes you probably wonder what happened and what happened to them. And is it something I did, according to the universal fears? Okay. And that's maybe scared because I'm thinking about what you said about them moving. Your parents might be scared because you were taken out of your home and they're really worried about what's going to happen to them. I don't know, that kind of stuff. But I wouldn't, if you don't know, you don't know. And what you can say is that's terrible not to know. It's terrible. It's sad and it's terrible and it's scary to not have any idea when you're going to see your parents again. Okay, and I really think that being by the side of kids and being able to say that and be with them is really a very, very precious thing. Even though they are in terrible grief about what's happening. That's the best I can do.
I appreciate it.
What else? Anybody else?
Can I just say something about what Ms. Genevieve just said?
Yeah, sure.
I totally agree, Paula. This has just been wonderful. I think, and I've worked with lots of children in foster care. I'm also adoptive parent of a child that was in the foster care system for many years. I think that we can't emphasize enough that it's not their fault.
Okay.
That when grown-ups can't do their job, which is to take care of children and be parents, it's not because the child did something wrong. It's not because they're bad. And thinking about those developmental fears according to the age of that child and how we talk about that. But I know that's something that children live with. So I think it's worth taking extra care to emphasize that when we can.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay, that's really an important thing all the time. I think we can almost always assume, especially foster kids, but kids that go through trauma, that they are believing in some way that it's their fault that things happen. Yeah. Okay. Somebody asked here, thank you, Deborah. Somebody asked here, Angela, about perinatal loss. Women asked when or if they should tell their children about the miscarriage and about abortion. Great question. I want to say depends. It depends in a lot of ways. It depends on what the child knew. Okay, if a child knows that a mother was pregnant and knows that she hasn't been pregnant anymore, that's time to talk about it. Okay, if it's something that's discussed all the time, I think it's something to be discussed over their heads. Kind of, if there's a chance. And one of the things that we often ask parents is, what do you think that the child knows about what happened? And an abortion, an early abortion, I'm not sure that's something that kids have to know about, unless it was something that was talked about. It was something that the parents fought about. Okay, that they heard that kind of fighting. Okay, it was something that the parent, one of the parent deserted the other parent because of it, and so forth. But I kind of want to say humorously that you're run-of-the-mill abortion, a person that makes a decision. I'm not sure. It really depends on what they're seeing in their around. And I think that one of the important things with small children is that often parents that miscarriage later are wondering what to say to their kids, and kids just know that we talk about babies all the time, and they see, they see tummies, and they see the anticipation, and it is something that needs to be talked about if it was there for the child, if the child knew that it happened. Now, as a caveat here, because often parents will deny that children knew, even though they probably did know, because it's hard for them to tell. So we want to ask, what was spoken about? What were the circumstances? Okay, what did the kid know about the pregnancy in general?
Yeah, most of the women that I see have children, like you said, that are a little, or like I said, a little bit older, like 4, 5, 6, and then mostly it is about miscarriage. Like, so they knew mommy was pregnant, and then mommy wasn't. Right. They may have been there, like known that mom went into the hospital to get something done, or something happened at home, and they would just be told like, well, mommy was sick and then lost the baby. Right. But, the moms are like, I feel like I should let them know that how far along I was, where this child went, because that's like the number one question they get asked. Well, where did the child go? Where did the baby go? And I've just kind of struggled with, well, it depends on their age. And, like,
that's a toughie.
They understand. So.
Yeah, where did the child go? You're asking if children should know. In that kind of situation, absolutely. Depends really on what children know, what they've seen, okay, what's been spoken about in their families, and so forth. Okay. The other questions I think have a lot to do also a little bit with culture, and a little bit about what we talk about in birth and death, and what happens when babies die, and so forth. And that's a really hard one. I'm gonna take total shameless advantage of the fact that we're almost done and not have to answer that question about what you say to a kid, because I don't really know. That's the kind of thing that I would go and ask my friend Smadar. Okay. I would say, okay. And I really want to say that again, is that things don't come always really naturally. Okay, to us about talking about an abortion or talking about a miscarriage. What happened? Okay, the baby actually, does the child know about, for instance, menstruation? Right? What happens? Where is their blood? So how can you talk about what happens? It's a complicated thing to talk about. So I'm going to use that, okay, to say that these are kind of things that really need to be talked about amongst you. Okay, when you're really debating about how to talk about sensitive topics with people, go and talk with your colleagues or get supervision about it and so forth, because it is not automatically clear to us at all. And that's a perfect example, Angela, that you gave at the end, what it is that we actually want to say. Okay. And nobody has to know what to say.
Paula,
trauma is
there
to
is
talk about.
one hand raised. I don't know if we have a second. Maybe Deborah was going to respond.
I was just going to say, it's
yes, Deborah, say something.
Perfect Patricia Van Horn moment. She would say, it depends. And that's just what you're saying. So yeah, all these variables, the age, the situation, the cultural belief. So thank you so much.
Yeah, that's really a hard thing to say. Okay, so we're done, right?
Well, thank you so much. I think
thank you all.
Been really so interesting and super practical for everyone. And I would like just to ask for everyone to answer our survey that I just put in the chat. And especially if you are assigned for CUs, please complete it fully and let us know at the last question what kind of CUs you need. And that's about the thing. Thank you again, and for everyone for coming.
I'll actually, I'll send the PDF of the slides to you if anybody wants them, then they can, be handed out. And I know that Deborah put in the link to the
article. We can send that as well.
But I'll send it as well, just in case anybody hasn't gotten hold of the link. And also, I think Dijon, you put up the YouTube thing about Never Give Up. Is that what you put up on the link as well? Yeah. Okay, good. Okay.
Did you remember the name of the book with all the things that you were talking about at the very beginning?
Hold on a second. I told you I was going to look at it in the break, and I actually did not. Let's take a look for a second. It wasn't a book; it was a pamphlet, actually.
Oh, okay.
Let me see what it's called, and I'll show you. I'll show you what it looks like, actually. Let's see if I can find it. It should be on my desktop. Here we go. Okay, this is what it looks like.
NCTSN.
And what it does, if you look, you can see it scrolling, right? It says the first part is what is complex trauma? Hold on, sorry. Ugh, it's not letting me scroll well. It talks about what it is. Sometimes young people grow up with a lot of bad things or hardly any good things or both. They talk about them. And then how it can impact me. And it says here, has anyone you know experienced any of these difficulties or negative thoughts about yourselves? Okay, and it goes on and it has a little workbook thing that you could talk about how it's impacted your beliefs about yourself and so forth. And then ways you cope. Okay, the difficult situations, what I might do, how it can cause problems for me and so forth. It's really cool. I really like it. Okay. You all.
Well, thank you so much. I'm gonna stay here for 1 minute just to see that everyone took the link.
Okay.
And thank you. We'll be in touch.
Okay. Okay. Bye-bye.